Hello and welcome to Modern Fantasy Violence, a podcast about pop culture and the world around it. I'm Nick.
And I'm Alistair.
And this fortnight we're here to talk about the third season of Marvel's Daredevil, the headline series in the whole Defenders-verse Netflix project, in which Daredevil takes on the Kingpin for the second and possibly final time. Who knows? We'll probably talk about it in a second. And then we'll be asking, since this is a rare comics adaptation where we've both read the source material comparatively recently, as Season 3 of Daredevil is reasonably... Actually, no, it's loosely based. I'm sure we'll get on to exactly how heavily it is based on it, but yeah, it's definitely at least loosely based around the classic story Born Again by Frank Miller and David Mazzucchelli. We will be asking, how does knowing the source comic change your viewing experience? But before all of that, Alistair, what, if anything, have you consumed lately?
Well, I've seen Mike Leigh's new film, Peterloo, which is should be out in the cinema at the time of release of this podcast. Yeah, it's a good film. For those who don't know, it's about the Peterloo Massacre, which was an event that took place in 1819 and is one of the sort of seminal events in British democracy. I think it's really strange that this isn't more widely known about this event or isn't taught in schools, or at least not taught in schools that much. It's when a group of mainly Manchester sort of mill and factory workers gathered to demand various reforms to the political system and in a sort of peaceful protest, and then were attacked by cavalry officers. I think 15 people were killed and about 400 or something wounded. It caused outrage across the country. It was one of the things that led to the first Great Reform Act and sort of the road to making Britain a democracy. So Mike Leigh's made this film about the event. It's beautiful historic film. There's lots and lots of period detail. It's got a really large cast. It's one of those films when they kind of look at a broad spectrum of characters, all of whose lives intertwine around the seminal event of the massacre itself. So people from all sorts of different walks of life, the mill workers and various political radicals, organisers, newspaper people, judges, soldiers. It's a really interesting film, covering obviously an important period of history, and it is very well made and very beautifully done. Also quite a powerful film.
Yeah, I can confirm I knew nothing about this historical event until I think you told me about it around the time you went to see this film. So yeah, this definitely is general knowledge, no.
Making a big sort of lavish film adaptation hopefully will help make people more aware of it, kind of injected into the pop culture. It's probably like quite a big British film. It might win BAFTAs, although I can imagine this isn't going to make a huge splash internationally.
I'm not sure I've seen... also, don't know if I'd have been aware of the film had you not talked about it. I haven't seen posters or anything. Most of the film posters I've seen lately have been the really, really boring ones they've got up for Fantastic Beasts 2, which are just a bunch of people standing against a white background. I mean, God, if Harry Potter can't afford graphic designers, what hope for the rest of us?
Yeah. I've seen a few posters on the tube and a few buses, but not many. Certainly nowhere near as many as the Fantastic Beasts. They don't seem to have a huge budget for promotion. Maybe they're just relying on word of mouth, or people actually just saying, this film is good, go see it.
Like you are now.
Yeah, exactly. Signal boosting, I believe, as they say on Twitters.
Yeah, I mean, if you could get the word out to at least one of our 40-ish listeners, then who knows? Maybe some of them will go and see it.
I would recommend it if you're interested in history and very well done historical adaptations. Beautiful sets, costumes, and historical accuracy. Yeah, then I'd recommend it. If you're interested in radical history and British democracy and kind of what made the country kind of the way it is today, then it's an important film. If you're a big fan of Mike Leigh, who's done a lot of good films like Happy Go Lucky, Secrets and Lies, he doesn't do that many historical films, but I guess this one he felt was important.
Any famous people in it? Anyone from Game of Thrones?
It's got quite a large cast. Maxine Peake is in it. She's very good. There are a lot of people in it because they do really show like a broad spectrum of characters. Maxine Peake was the one who jumped out the most.
Yeah.
There were definitely quite a few other people in it. I'm just bringing up the cast list now. But also, yeah, it kind of shows as like the wide backgrounds of people who attended there, all the kind of different political views and different kind of goals. Roy Kinnear, one of the main characters. He's very good. I saw him on the stage recently.
Yes, known possibly best for the pig sex Prime Minister job in Black Mirror. It's weird because I'm pretty sure he's done more things than that, but are probably more high profile, but I feel like that is a role he's going to take to his grave. Yeah,
I saw him on the stage last year in Young Marx, playing the young Karl Marx, which was very good. If you're looking for an alternative to Fantastic Beasts, then yeah, this is a good film.
We, however, will be covering Fantastic Beasts.
Yes, and we've just covered Peterloo. Anyway, Nick, what do you have to recommend to our listeners?
Back somewhat more in our home niche of mainstream nerd culture, I've watched the first few episodes of Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, the relaunch of the Sabrina property originally from Archie Comics, although probably best known on a mainstream basis for the 90s TV adaptation starring Melissa Joan Hart, who was, of course, the every woman teen girl of America's dreams for a brief period when she was playing Clarissa in Clarissa Explained It All, and then Sabrina in Sabrina the Teenage Witch. And yeah, they've now relaunched Sabrina the Teenage Witch as, I don't know, the gut instinct is to say it's more of a horror show, although it's a very campy form of horror. Basically, if you imagine Buffy only with a bit more explicit Satanism and a bit less fighting, it's a bit like that.
Yeah.
There's less kung fu. It's more about doing spells and angsting. And they're actually, unlike Buffy, which I think was always a bit coy about using real-world Satanism tropes, they're very much going in hard on that, even in a slightly overblown, campy way. Well, one of the main satanic characters is played by Michelle Gomez of Missy from Doctor Who and Green Wing fame, and she is playing it with all the subtlety and restraints with which she is well known. So that is the level to which a lot of the Satanism is being played.
This is a show that I've been wanting to watch. Yeah, a few people have recommended to me saying it's good, and also it does have a large poster campaign across London now. Certainly more impressive than Peterloo. Yeah, I probably would have watched it this week if there hadn't been so much Daredevil to chew down. But it does look very good, and it does look like they've taken, I guess, what was quite a very 90s show and seem to have made it look very modern. So if you compare the way the two shows look, they don't seem very similar.
I mean, they're taking a lot of their cues from the show Riverdale, which is another show run by the same showrunner and based on an Archie comic, in that they've pushed it into this level of really melodramatic teen angst and then added this extra layer of gothicness on top of it, which works fairly well because, well, there are a lot of angsty teen goths. It's not the same show, if only because it's aimed at might be the wrong word for I Am 34, but it feels like it's trying to channel more actual teenagers in their mid to late teens, whereas Sabrina the Teenage Witch felt like it was aimed at 11-year-olds.
Does it still have the sarcastic cat?
The cat is present. I think they knew they could not do the cat. However, is this a spoiler? It's established fairly early on, so I'm going to say no, but apologies to the universe if it is. The cat does not talk, as far as I can tell. I am 3 episodes in, and the cat is merely a sort of faithful cat companion. You know, it seems fairly intelligent, but it doesn't actually speak. It just cats around.
Well, I guess it was a sort of slightly cheap-looking puppet in the original show, so I assume they thought maybe this would be stretching the bounds of credibility if they go back to cheap puppets.
It's interesting, because there's a certain level of silliness they're clearly willing to go with, like, you know, as I say, quite a lot of Michelle Gomez vamping around with no subtlety whatsoever, but apparently a talking cat would have just been a bridge too far. It's also got Jeff from Coupling playing another satanic priest in, well, a slightly restrained way compared to Jeff from Coupling, but in general terms, it's pretty stupid.
Cool. Well, I'm glad you like it. I'm looking forward to watching it.
I mean, Riverdale, I got us about halfway through season 2 before it just became kind of irritating. The level of twists went from being this is fun to this is stupid, and nothing ever seemed to really happen or matter. It was just a lot of, I don't know, noise and fury, I suppose. So I'm curious whether Sabrina is going to be able to actually find its level and stick to it, rather than just becoming bullshit for bullshit's sake. But we may not know that until, God knows, the second season, which has happily already been commissioned.
First up this episode, we are reviewing Daredevil from Marvel and Netflix. Picking up from the end of Defenders, Daredevil, or Matt Murdock, is presumed dead after a building fell on him. His friends, Karen Page and Foggy Nelson, are rebuilding their lives when Daredevil's old enemy, Wilson Fisk, is released from prison into FBI custody. Daredevil himself is still alive and hiding out in an orphanage where he grew up. On hearing of Fisk's release, he swears he is no longer Matt Murdock, but only Daredevil, and vows to bring Fisk down by any means necessary. We've seen the entire 3rd series of this show, so Nick, what did you think of it?
Yeah, headline point is I really like this. I think it's probably in the top 5 seasons they've done of these, possibly even the top 3. Admittedly, a lot of these get quite ropey in the middle. So just the fact that it managed to actually keep its pace relatively steady throughout, and I felt like I was watching, you know, a constantly tense, steadily unfolding drama, rather than an episode of drama followed by an episode of standing around talking, followed by an episode of drama, etc. Does push it into the upper echelons. But yeah, this is probably my favourite Defenderverse season since Punisher. I think they kept a nice sense of the back and forth between Matt and the Kingpin. There was some fun action sequences, including the apparently obligatory big one-take scene, which was really good this year, actually. Last year just felt a bit like a sort of diminishing returns rehash of the one from season 1, but this year they actually found a way to do the thing again without it just feeling like a bullshit rehash. So fair play to them. And yeah, it moved at a deliberate pace. The stakes kept going up and up and up in a way that felt steady throughout the season, rather than just sort of jerking up 3 episodes from the end. The characters all kept in motion. No one seemed to just sit around waiting for things to happen too much. Yeah, I liked it.
Yeah, I thought it was good, although I have my reservations. Maybe I didn't enjoy it as much as you did. I was thinking, with Iron Fist this year, they clearly went for, this is just going to be a fairly straightforward martial arts crime fighting show. They're going to kind of drop any pretensions of it being anything more than just a show about heroes and villains punching each other. And I think with Daredevil, they're clearly aspiring to something more, bringing in sort of broader themes and also trying to have, I don't know, there being a sort of a sense of like the whole city's at stake, and I don't know, and there being a sort of moral complexity to this. Like, is Daredevil, he's not either all good or bad. There's some complexity to it, especially over like the debates where he's wondering whether or not he should kill Wilson Fisk. I do think that it seemed quite similar to me, like to the first series. I mean, I definitely preferred this to the second series of Daredevil because I think Fisk works as a villain much better than the Hand. And I think, as we discussed at length on this podcast, the Hand isn't a villain that particularly worked for me, or sincerely don't seem to work in these Marvel Netflix TV shows.
But I still think we can safely blame the Hand for scuttling, or at least taking down the entire project, to be honest. I feel like...
They invested too much into the Hand.
Season after season of the Hand, maybe one reason why a mainstream audience doesn't seem to care that much about these things anymore.
No, especially not since, with the launch of the original Daredevil series and like Jessica Jones and Luke Cage as well, there seems to be a lot more buzz around these shows. Maybe it's partly because it's harder to generate buzz about something that's not new, or maybe it's also because people got tired of the Hand. But I do feel there was a lot of sort of retrodden ground in this series, with it kind of being Daredevil facing off against the sort of all-powerful Wilson Fisk character. I mean, Fisk is like a good villain, but I did feel they were very much like retreading familiar ground.
What, from season 1?
Yeah.
Yeah, and possibly as someone who has a certain amount of affection for this dynamic from the comics, maybe I could just watch Daredevil and the Kingpin circle each other all the live long day. I don't know. As someone who was hoping for something more resembling the classic Born Again story, it never quite reached that level of intensity. There was always a weird level to which Daredevil and the Kingpin were kind of talking past each other. But this worked okay for me, possibly just because it's been so long since season 1. Like, seriously, if you asked me to seriously recap season 1 beyond the very broadest of strokes, I could not do it. I was more or less ready for another straight-up season of Daredevil versus Kingpin.
Yeah, because I guess this is technically the 4th Daredevil series. It's kind of Defenders is basically the 3rd Daredevil series. So it's 4 years since the first one came out.
Yeah, I also feel like this is one of those shows which is kind of, I don't know, I don't know if I want to frame it as an apology, but I feel like there's a degree of, yes, okay, we hear you, we're going back to the thing you actually liked, intrinsic in a lot of this. And maybe one of the reasons why it feels like it has to really reassert some of the season 1 stuff is because I feel like there's a degree to which they're sort of quietly apologising for a lot of the season 2 and Defenders stuff, or at least quietly agreeing to ignore it. Like, the words "the Hand" are not, I believe, uttered in the whole of the 13 episodes of Daredevil season 3, which is impressive considering they were basically the key plot of all of season 2 and, as you say, the thing that was essentially season 2.5.
Yeah, and also almost all of Iron Fist.
Yeah.
And I did really appreciate that, the fact that, like, yeah, that was one of the strengths, is like, okay, we're jettisoning the Hand. They were also jettisoning any sort of, like, complex crossover with other Netflix shows. It was very much a kind of, you can just watch this as a standalone thing. I think Jessica Jones is mentioned once, and that's the only other implication that there's anything more going on than just basically this show. It was almost like kind of going back to it just existing in its own universe. So the decomplexification and the de-handification of Series 3 really did work. And like I say, if they're going to go back to something that did work, looking at Series 1 and being like, so that was quite good. So yeah, a bit more of that. And obviously also the source material they're adapting, Born Again, is like heavily Kingpin / Wilson Fisk oriented. There's another reason. And also I know that like the way comics work is that, yeah, recurring hero and villain combinations, the fact that like these heroes and villains go round and round and round is never really resolved. It's kind of the sort of soap opera nature of comics, and some of that's bleeding into this TV show. But with modern premium television, you do expect a sense of progression. I
don't know whether they were attempting to some sort of trilogy structure, and there was the first bit where he fought the Kingpin, there was the middle bit where he fought someone else, but the Kingpin was still sort of present, and then the third bit where he has his final showdown with the Kingpin.
Very much the Indiana Jones structure.
If you say so.
Nazis, then not Nazis. Nazis than Nazis.
Yeah, so I don't know whether that is what they were attempting. I suspect they probably wanted it to feel like a pre-planned epic trilogy, even if that wasn't the original plan. But, I mean, the fact that they did bother to bring Kingpin back for like a 2-episode I'm still here cameo in season 2 suggests they probably were always planning something a bit like this.
Yeah, and that's just to keep the character fresh.
But yeah, I think there's a lot of, don't worry lads, we're still a crime show. I mean, part of me was a bit, I think I liked the fact they went back to him just wearing his black pyjamas. I don't know if they ever entirely made the armoured Daredevil costume work.
Yeah, exactly. Part of it also trying to make it go back to being a bit more believable in this series. Like, we've jettisoned the hand, we've jettisoned any of the mystical dead resurrection, things like that. We're going to go back to, a man who's good at martial arts fighting, a gangster. And also, across the whole kind of project, the 2 series of Daredevil Defenders and then this 3rd series, there is quite a good decline and rise from the ashes story in that, the 2nd series has the breakup of the Nelson and Murdoch sort of law partnership, the estrangement from Karen and Foggy, then the decline, to the point when everyone thinks he's dead at the end of Defenders, clearly at his lowest point when he's physically, emotionally broken, cut off from everyone else. And then this 3rd series is the rising from the ashes as he rebuilds first the Daredevil persona and then his life as Matt Murdock. And, well, actually, I won't say more than that because that's getting into discussing the end of series 3, which is spoilery.
I did actually have some specific points about the ending, but if we do get into those, we'll get into them in a bit. I think one of the reasons why this maybe worked for me is I did buy quite heavily into that emotional journey of him sort of slowly rebuilding himself. And obviously, this is a show which is fundamentally about men rasping manfully about saving the city and their great manly duty. And there's an extent to which that kind of show is becoming a bit passé, and I think there are a lot of people who will probably, even if it's well done, just are not in the mood to enjoy that sort of thing anymore.
I think Gotham has eaten up most people's credit on that front.
Honestly, I think you're giving Gotham too much credit for people actually watching it. Honestly, things like Batman v Superman probably ate it harder. But yeah, the gothic, pretentious man show of it all may be a turn-off, but I was quite invested in Matt Murdock's little emotional journey from, as you say, broken man in an orphanage to vaguely functioning human again, which probably helped. There's a side character called Agent Nadeem who is not in the comics, really, and who gets to play quite a big role in the Kingpin story. And although he seemed like a bit of a pat non-character at first, I was quite impressed at his little journey through the series. I felt like they did a good job again of having these characters actually seem to go through something.
Yeah, no, that is very true. Agent Nadeem went through a sort of transformation. There was another new villain they introduced, which was also one of the things that did work, is that it wasn't just Wilson Fisk. They also introduced another villain who was Poindexter, or Dex, who became a sort of evil Daredevil, partly after he stole Daredevil's original armoured suit. So partly so they could have 2 Daredevils fighting each other. But yeah, he had a sort of a decline, a sort of straight decline story from regular FBI agent into full-on supervillain. And yeah, Nadine had a good decline and then redemption story, which I think is very much sort of thematic what they're going with Daredevil. I mean, as you say, the source material this is based on is called Born Again. Sinning and redemption very much goes with the character's sort of Irish Catholic background. A lot of this takes place in a church, so they can have long discussions about, sin and redemption. So I think it's a very much a sort of standard plot trope of all Western literature, partly again because of the religious influences on so much literature, including the Catholic influences, this idea of sort of a sin, a fall, redemption and return to grace structure, which you see across all the Daredevil, and you see in characters, and also the characters that either like Nadine sin, fall, then choose the hard redemptive path and end up with, again, some form of redemption at the end, or the characters like Poindexter who choose not to fall and end up punished. It works very much sort of thematically, which I quite liked.
Partly possibly because so many people fucking love Born Again. The Matt Murdock has his entire life destroyed, becomes a broken nothing, and then rises again to some form of completeness. It's been done a few times. It's been done so many times, but I think people had to stop doing it a while back because it just became borderline self-parody. But since it hasn't been done quite as fully explicitly in this TV show, I'm glad they got a chance to do it, and I thought did a reasonably good job of it.
Yeah, it's something they've clearly been building up to as they clearly marked the decline. Whereas, interesting, in Born Again, the low point comes right in the middle of the story. Whereas in this one, I guess the lowest point is kind of the beginning. But I suppose it's the low point of the overall Daredevil story. Certainly the story that kind of, covers Series 2 and Defenders, the kind of it all falling apart.
Yeah, that's the one major plot point from Season 2 and Defenders they did stick with, the part where he had a building fall on him at the end of Defenders battle, which again they managed to, use and reference in the plot without ever mentioning the hand.
Yeah, and also the death of his love interest, his previous love interest, which was Elektra. So the fact that she's dead, I mean, she's mentioned a bit at the beginning, but it is dropped quite early on. Partly, I guess, because if they're trying to make this a reintroduction for people, they don't want to harp on too much about previous plots. There's this idea, that Elektra, who he loved, is dead, and all his friends think he's dead, and he's estranged from his friends, and that's kind of very much the low point. And at the low point, he goes back to his childhood roots, of the orphanage he grew up in, which is very much a signature of Born Again. And then he rises from that. Although I did feel, as much as I did like the nice structure of it and like the themes they were exploring, I did sometimes find that he was a little bit mopey or a bit angsty. Or like it's a bit too much. It was kind of, I know, as you say, this is a show in which men put on masks or some form of face obscuring attire and then talk in raspy voices about the need to save the city before punching something. But I did feel there's a bit, to a degree to which, like, he was just having a bit of a sulk in the basement, Daredevil. Like, I don't know, maybe he should stick on some Papa Roach and say, like, no one understands me. No one understands what it's like to be Daredevil. And then as part of me was a bit like, just make up with Foggy and Karen. You're clearly all going to be friends by the end of this. I don't know. I mean, it did feel a bit like he was having like a sort of prolonged existential sulk. But then again, there was always the kind of crime plot saved it from being too self-indulgent.
Yeah, there is a part of me who would have liked to see him, I mean, I guess this is a very, very broad spoiler again, get back together with Foggy and Karen a bit earlier, because that dynamic does actually work quite well. Those two characters are quite well established, and it's nice when they get to all be together and play off each other, and that didn't really happen until, relatively close to the very, very end. And yes, I would have possibly kind of liked to see that a bit earlier, but on the other hand, then I guess if they'd let him walk out of his broken existential misery too early, it wouldn't have felt meaningful enough. So yeah, there's a part of me that admires them for fully committing to the no, really, he's sad and alone and sad and alone.
Yeah.
Part. I could also, maybe they could have let him pull out of it a bit by mid-season rather than waiting until the very end.
Yeah.
I don't know.
But I did think it was well paced overall, which is one of the things that, like, had it been not as well paced, then the mopiness would have become much more of a problem. I mean, we've discussed at length with pretty much all of these Netflix shows, there is a pacing problem in that they kind of go a bit slow in the middle, usually because, as we said, there often isn't enough plot to fill 13 episodes. And I think, as we said before on this podcast, that one of the better paced ones actually is Iron Fist Series 2, because they made it only 10 episodes. And I do felt that this one probably overall could have been shorter to make it a bit tighter, which is the standard criticism. But the pacing is definitely better than probably both series of Luke Cage or the second series of Jessica Jones. They have clearly improved the pacing here, and the crime plot ticks along quite nicely. There's usually a sort of major event in that plot in every episode. That means that, like, it keeps moving forwards. There's usually an event involving Karen or Foggy or both, which again keeps their plot lines moving forwards, which means that despite the fact that there are bits when Daredevil's just having a bit of a sulk, it doesn't affect the show too much because it's well paced. If it had been 2 to 3 episodes right in the middle when it's just been a prolonged sulk session, that would have been sort of really put a sinker on it, which is some of the pacing mistakes they made before, but overall the pacing helped here.
And I quite liked the Fisk storyline where he's sort of playing this weird game of cat and mouse with the FBI. I felt that was a nice twist on the usual Kingpin storyline. I mean, it was always kind of inevitable that he would, outplay them and become, the full Kingpin at some point in the midsection, and then they would all realise that he'd made them all look like chumps. But yeah, I quite enjoyed the way it stomped along.
Yeah, as with a lot of these shows, the way it works is the Kingpin story is the kind of mirror of the Daredevil story, which is that his story is a rise and fall, whereas Daredevil's story is like fall and redemption. And obviously, Kingpin's highest point is like Daredevil's lowest point, or at least within the arc of just Series 3. Obviously, we said that like the lowest point for Daredevil is probably the beginning when he's completely broken, but by the middle, there's a bit when the Kingpin seems all-powerful, and the things look pretty dire for the heroes, even though they are working together at this point. But it looks like the Kingpin is all but triumphed. And then the second half, obviously, is the inverse of that, with them bringing down the Kingpin and the redemption of the main character. So I did like that. I did feel, as well as I like Kingpin as a villain, some of the bits with him really did stretch the bounds of credibility. I know it's the superhero TV show. Its sort of lack of credibility is by its nature, but in this series, when they've got rid of the hand, they've got rid of a lot of the mystical stuff. They're trying to go back to much more of a kind of vigilante and crime boss drama. There were some bits when I thought like Kingpin has become almost godlike in power. There's a bit later on, might get a bit spoilery, so if you're really chronically averse to spoilers, maybe skip ahead, when they managed to get a grand jury to indict the Kingpin, and then for some reason the Kingpin already has people in the grand jury working against him. Like, at this point it's like, is he magic? They've done this in secret. How did he have time to set this up? Or was literally every single person in the state of New York, apart from Daredevil and Foggy Nelson and Karen Page, under the influence of the Kingpin? I mean, I know he's supposed to be like the most powerful gangster in the state or whatever, but there is some points where I felt like he's just become almost like godlike at this point, that he can do anything, which kind of makes you feel like, well, they kind of took me out of the fantasy a bit, and like, this is possibly going too far.
Yeah, I did get a flash of that at that twist. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a weird thing where the man has a computer in a dark room with lots of screens, and therefore that basically means he has the godlike ability to control the modern world. Is that seems to have become a bit of a trope at this point?
Yeah.
And the Kingpin has a secret room with a computer with lots of screens, and therefore he's basically in charge of everything. I mean, it is what it is, and it kept the plot ticking along, but yeah, there are a couple of moments where there's a bit where he has, in fact, yeah, I could probably just say this broadly, there are various bits where he has like compromised people in advance, and even though a lot of the time it is, people you can see why he might want to compromise, it's always quite impressive how he's done basically everything 20 moves ahead of everybody.
Yeah, well, that's the strength of the character, and he's not a magical character. His point is that he's clever and he plans in advance and he's good at manipulating people, but there comes a point when like, you can't just be manipulating everyone all the time just because you've got a computer with 4 monitors.
It's true. I have 2 monitors at work and I can barely do anything. Yeah, I liked the Kingpin's sort of weird, sort of Shakespearean romantic intensity. It's really weird in this show because no one else in this show talks that way.
Yeah.
In this sort of grand monologuing tone. Even though there's a lot of monologuing in this show, everyone else is quite, as we say, quite raspy and quite low voice, intense, whereas the Kingpin is declaring everything.
He does sound like that.
And it's weird, but especially in this show where Daredevil is far too busy, as you say, sulking in a basement to think about the ladies. The Kingpin is also basically the romantic lead. Yeah,
that's true. That's another point. The main romantic story is about, as it has been in Daredevil before, is about Kingpin and his love interest Vanessa.
Yeah, there's not going thing in the comics where Daredevil is actually a bit of a slightly morally dubious womanizer sometimes. Like, he's a bit too keen to jump in with anyone who's interested. But yeah, not yet much in the TV show.
They hinted at that in the first series, I think, especially in flashbacks to Foggy and Matt's college days. There's this general sense that, like, especially in the first series, that, Foggy and Matt are a bit sort of slightly laddish I don't know, not playboys because they're not particularly rich, but like they're sort of men about town, I guess, is the way to put it. Is that an expression people have used since the 50s?
I mean, it's the first time we've used it in 75 podcasts, so...
Yeah. I mean, Fisk is a good character, which is why it works. And obviously, it's a great character for the actor to play, and I can't remember the actor's name, but he is very good at the part.
Vincent D'Onofrio,
yeah, that's it. Yeah, he is very good in the part, and he's got this intensity, and he's well written, which is why he works so well as a villain. And I think, as a lot of people said, including us, the first series worked so well because he's a good villain, and the second series didn't work so well because he's not really in it.
I seem to recall you saying you didn't like the Kingpin that much in the first season, or am I misremembering?
I wasn't as taken with him, but I think I'm more saying what the general consensus is.
Yeah.
I don't think I was as taken with the Kingpin as you were. And again, here, maybe why I didn't quite enjoy this as much as you did, is I did feel like it is a bit more Kingpin. I see we've done this before. But, I mean, he's not like a terrible villain. And also, that was back when we'd only had a few series. I mean, after time, we've had a lot of more rubbish villains, such as Diamondback, or whoever the villain was supposed to be in the first series of Iron Fist, or even the villain in the second series of Iron Fist.
Davos,
who was very much a angry martial arts British guy.
Davos was just from here's an evil, dark version of the hero school of villains, really, without much else to it, which, that can sort of work, but they sometimes seem to fall back on it in a bit of a boring way in these superhero things.
Yeah, and obviously the legions and legions of rubbish hand villains. So actually, maybe I've warmed to the Kingpin over time now that we can see that, like, it can be a lot worse. And they did some interesting things with making him seem a bit Trump-like without, I don't know, being too blatant or too much like, oh, here's the bit when they lecture us on the state of America today, with those various things, how the Kingpin's always like attacking and the press and dismissing the lies about him when the lies are obviously the truth, that he's a massive criminal villain. The sort of sense that he's like above the law, all-powerful, where no one can touch him, whatever he does, despite the fact it's like he's blatantly bad news in public and blatantly up to no good, but like he seems to be too powerful and above the law. So they kind of drew out some interesting parallels there with the character.
Are we just more ready for the Kingpin at this stage in society? Has the depressing events of the last 2 years just persuaded us that yes, actually, fair enough. Yeah. It probably would work that way, to be honest.
Well, okay. Yeah.
It is a bit of a humorless show, even by Defenders standards. You know, Luke Cage and like the better second season of Iron Fist do rely a bit on a certain level of not exactly comedy, but gentle humour to make you like the characters and draw you into what's going on. Whereas Daredevil is relentlessly grim, relentlessly po-faced. And again, that is going to make it a bit of a hard litmus test on your tolerance for these sort of raspy man shows. Even if that is what they're going for, there were occasions where a few people could have broken the straight face a little. But, yeah, I don't know. I guess this is the aesthetic they've committed to, come hell or high water.
Yeah. There was some very good bits. I did really like there was half an episode was given over to Karen's backstory, back when Daredevil became Winter's Bone for half an episode. But that was actually really good. I don't know. They got out of New York and they managed to, again, I don't know, do a sort of a bit of kitchen sink, blue-collar American drama for half an episode. That was a nice change.
Yeah, I liked that. They vaguely hinted about Karen's dark backstory to the extent that I was a bit sort of, when we find out what it is it ever going to live up to all this vague hinting? But it did actually work quite well. I was pleasantly surprised. I did then wonder if that meant they were about to kill her. It's like, is this the sort of thing you do when she's about to get, you know, something thrown through her by evil Daredevil in the following scene? Which possibly is what they wanted me to think, to be honest, because that did very nearly happen.
Yeah.
There's also other adaptation-based reasons where I thought that might happen, but I might get to that in the second half.
And also we got to meet Foggy and his family, which is nice to show that, like, he does have a family. He is a proper person.
Yeah, I see Foggy get a bit of shit in some reviews. I think some people think that he is some combination of a boring character or a bad actor, but I quite like him. Partly possibly because of the humorousness I just mentioned. He is the closest this show has to a person who seems like he enjoys himself or seems like he might sometimes be happy. I don't know. My Fesp radar maybe isn't finely tuned enough to tell you whether he's a great actor or not, but I think he plays that role quite well in this show.
I mean, it's not a particularly demanding role, but I mean, he's good at, like, you know, you feel sorry for him when, you know, he looks like he's about to be murdered at various points by Fisk. You know, you sympathise with the character and you're very much invested in the Nelson-Murdoch friendship, and that you do want them to patch it up and go back to the dream team of the two of them working together. I think, yeah, the character works as well. I think, as we said in the Luke Cage review, that Foggy Nelson is anything the character I most identify with, the one who does the books and the papers rather than the martial arts.
I don't know. I think he does a good job of being the vaguely well-rounded, nice bloke in this show, but still being able to exist in this world. He can put on his grim face and talk determinedly about the crime when he has to. He doesn't come across as a weird, grinning sad sack.
No, exactly.
I mean, yeah, having said all this, I did actually want to do 5 minutes on the ending, so shall we do one of our patented spoiler declarations? And
yeah, we'll, and then that's a way to wrap up, yeah.
Because we have to find one. Yeah, okay, that's what we're doing. So yeah, if you haven't seen the ending of Daredevil Season 3, I at least am about to do a few minutes on what I thought of the actual moment-to-moment plot of the very last episode. So if you don't want to hear that, I would suggest you go to the show notes, which are on the website, or the iTunes notes, if I've set it up correctly, and jump forward to the beginning of the next segment. Or if you want to just jab the button on your phone, I imagine it'll be about 5 minutes, it usually is. Or just keep going till you hear the little plinky electronic jingle. Okay. Yeah, having said everything I just said, I did find the plot of the last episode slightly weird at times. In fact, in one specific moment I found it weird. There was a bit where I was quite impressed by the way that Matt had set up his plot. Like, he decided he was going to kill the Kingpin, and instead of, like, charging madly into this building and getting himself killed, he basically set up Dex to do it for him.
Yeah, I thought that was quite cleverly done, how he manipulated the other supervillain, who was also one of Kingpin's main henchmen, into killing him, which seems like a sensible way. And I think I was confused by exactly what you're about to get to.
Yes, and I was fully expecting, and to be honest, I don't want to write your show for you lads, but I think this might have been better, the part where he sends Dex in to kill the Kingpin, and then he finds out from Foggy or Karen that they've got the evidence to get the Kingpin without killing him, and then he feels bad about it and has to stop Dex from killing the Kingpin.
Yeah, I assume that's what they were aiming for.
But instead he just charges in after him for no seeming reason.
Yeah, I didn't really understand that. There's all sorts of ways you could justify it, like, you know, like he decided he didn't want to kill him in the end, or whatever, but none of those are really dramatized. It does seem a bit odd that, first of all, Daredevil manipulates Dex into killing the Kingpin and then tries to charge in, and at various points, I think, tries to save the Kingpin from actually being killed directly by Dex. I mean, it was a quite weird sort of about face.
I don't think he was actually trying to save the Kingpin at any point. He just was constantly trying to stop Dex from killing either either Daredevil himself or the Kingpin's wife. He seemed willing to let Dex kill the Kingpin for most of it, but the plot kept having to bend in strange ways to get them into this weird, like, four-way fight. It's like, I don't know. Obviously Matt Murdock is a self-punishing lunatic, and if that's what he wants to do, then you can probably just sign it off as... And then he charges on in there to try and kill the Kingpin himself as well, because that's just what Matt does. And to an extent, that kind of works with the character, because that is the sort of thing that Matt does. But it just seemed a bit weird, and it just seemed like the other option would have been much, much better.
Yeah, no, I found that sort of slightly confusing. That was a sort of bizarre about take, because with the plot of the last few episodes worked quite well with, like, in the second last episode, they tried to take the Kingpin down using the law, and that fails. And then in the last episode, he's going to take Kingpin down vigilante style, and then in the last minute, they find a way to actually get him using the law. So that sort of worked.
The overall plot works fine. That's why I'm not really... This isn't, killing the whole series too hard for me. I just found that particular beat a bit strange.
Yeah, that was a bit odd. But then they resolve the Kingpin plot line, although, like I say, he may be back, he's not dead. They've kept him alive, I guess, in case they want to use him at some point. And then, pretty much at the end, they set up again the classic partnership of Page, Nelson and Murdoch all working together. So very much it's kind of, they've completed their fall and redemption arc, and everything's kind of back to where it was at the beginning of Series 1, so it's kind of reset. So they do a Series 4, I guess we're back to the classic Daredevil setup. Just, they all know who Daredevil is now.
Yeah, and it's interesting, I guess, that they've left things open. They also haven't left things, hanging wide open. In the event that Daredevil gets cancelled, like a few of these Netflix shows seem to be getting, it did have an ending. It's not like Iron Fist and Luke Cage, which both felt like they were basically cancelled midway. If Daredevil ends here, it's not that bad an ending for the 3 seasons of Daredevil.
Yeah, they just go back to living their life, being lawyers, fighting a bit of low-level crime on the side, that sort of thing. Both Iron Fist and Luke Cage finished on a twist.
Yeah.
Yeah, they finished on a clear setup of this is where the story is going next. Partly because they haven't had a third series, and this is a third series, so they've done a 3-act story.
Yeah, which is kind of a shame. Obviously, everyone, I think, who is following these things is kind of waiting for the Marvel streaming service shoe to drop, where we find out that actually they're going to continue there, and I'll be interested to see if that happens, but for now, I guess we have to assume they're dead.
It's a shame, because I would have liked to have seen the Series 3 of Luke Cage. That looked like it was going in an interesting direction. The setup for the Series 3 of Iron Fist looked absolutely batshit mad, so I don't really know if the world is a better place for having that or not having that.
Yeah, I mean, I was, as you say, impressed by just how batshit the stuff they went for in the final few scenes of Iron Fist was. I was a bit sort of, okay. I mean, the fact that that's really weird doesn't necessarily make the show better, but it makes it seem like it might be less boring. For
our listeners, if you have no idea what we're talking about, it is worth going on YouTube and see if you can find the kind of last 5 minutes of the second series of Iron Fist. And it's the kind of bit just after clearly everything's wrapped up when they do a sort of scene from the next series, setting up the dynamic what the next series is going to be. As they do a lot on these shows. It's very much the kind of what would be in the post-credit sequence of a Marvel cinema film, and it is just really mad. So if you know what we're talking about, go watch it. Let us know if you think the world would be a better place with this third series of Iron Fist in it, or if you were like, no, let's not go there. Next, we will be asking, how does knowing the source comic change your viewing experience? As we've said, this series of Daredevil is loosely based on the comic Born Again, which we've both read and we covered on the podcast. Although it's quite loosely based on it, leaving us to think kind of, well, this bit's clearly heavily influenced by the comic. That's where they've changed something quite a lot to make it work for the story. So, which is a different viewing experience for me, although I can imagine one that happens more frequently to Nick as he's read more of the comics a lot of these TV shows and films are based on. But it is certainly a different viewing experience. But it's worth looking into in what way it's different and how. So, Nick, what are your thoughts on this topic?
My thoughts are many and varied. I mean, I don't know, I've watched so many things with roughly this lens on due to, the extreme proliferation of comic adaptations that it's almost quite hard to separate it out. I mean, like watching this season of Daredevil, as you say, it's loosely based on Born Again, although, to be honest, one of the ways in which it did kind of disappoint me, although I didn't really mention it that much in the review section because it's not really, I don't know, it's not really I don't know if it's really a criticism as such, is that it didn't really feel that much like a direct adaptation of Born Again, in that I don't know, one of the big feelings that I always got whilst reading Born Again was the massive personal enmity between the Kingpin and Daredevil, which then transfers to the Kingpin and Matt Murdock, and it feels very directly personal. Like, the Kingpin is very much going after Daredevil. And I guess I sort of alluded to it when I said that thing earlier about the Kingpin and Daredevil sort of talking past each other. It doesn't feel like the Kingpin is pursuing a gangster vendetta against Daredevil, because he isn't. And therefore, yeah, there's a part of me that was slightly disappointed that we've had what will probably be, at least for a while, the definitive TV adaptation of, well, yeah, live action, if you like, adaptation of Born Again. And we never really got that feeling. I don't know. It's one of these things where I don't know. I don't know if I could actually say that's bad or that's a missed opportunity. But I was a bit sort of, I was hoping for something a bit more like that. I mean, obviously, I'm glad they skipped over the bit where Karen Page becomes a junkie and sells Daredevil's secret identity for coke, or whatever happened in the comics. Although I think there was the bit where she slips up and reveals it by accident, which I think was kind of intended to be a small shout-out to that. One of these times was like, I really enjoyed this, but I don't know if I would give it a high rating as an adaptation of Born Again.
You'd have preferred something that stuck closer to the source material?
I don't know. I guess so. I mean, I liked what we got, but yes, I would also have quite liked to get that feeling of Kingpin really aggressively going after Matt Murdock personally, and I can't help but feeling that if anything, this season of Daredevil more set that up for next time. I assume there was a meeting where they said, can we have that feeling, or have we not quite built up the Kingpin Daredevil hatred enough to really make that work? No, we probably haven't. Okay, we probably can't do that to that degree quite yet. Yeah. I don't know. Anyway, this is the geeky ramblings of a mildly disappointed nerd. But yes, I was hoping for that moment, so I never really got it. Yeah, as I say, there are things I could live without, like Karen Page being a junkie or Nuke turning up. Anyway, what did you think?
Yeah, this happens to me less because I haven't read a lot of the comics these things are based on. I did feel that like they clearly changed a lot to make it fit with the story that they were trying to tell. As you say, partly like they changed it to get rid of things that just wouldn't work, like having Karen Page being a junkie. Although I suppose they did hint towards that when they had her teenage past when she was like a cocaine addict and things like that. The thing about these adaptations is they need to make them fit in with the overall story that they're telling. Like your character's a certain way and the plot's in a certain place that they have to, work with. So I think there was always going to be an element of taking Born Again and kind of beating it into the shape that fits, the mold. I'm really mixing my metaphors here. But basically bit into the shape that will fit in with the Daredevil story they've got so far. So there'll always be an element of like adaptation as it has to all work together. I mean, I think of a lot of these adaptations, they pick and choose sort of the best bits or the bits that kind of work, which I guess kind of changes the experience. You can kind of see, oh, that came from there and that came from there. The other prominent example of this, I think, is The Dark Knight Rises, which is sort of loosely based on the Batman comic Nightfall.
Amazingly loosely based on it, yeah.
Yeah, which is something, again, that I've read. But also, doesn't it bring in the plot of No Man's Land, which is another Batman comic as well? And like they've clearly cherry-picked from several major Batman comics, as well as just kind of finding something that fits with the story they've told in the previous two.
Considering how many comics have now been adapted into various forms of media, what's impressive in a lot of ways is how few stories have actually had straight, here it is, adaptations. I mean, a few of the Origins, I guess, kind of had. Outside the Origins, they really haven't done that with very much at all. It's very much been inspired by, There's, a few big moments in every film where you can go, oh, they did the thing. But it's very rarely you actually get to follow along and go, yes, at last I'm watching the live-action adaptation of Born Again or Nightfall or the Spider-Man clone saga, things that will never happen.
Which ones stick closer to the comics? Is it like, Captain America Civil War or Winter Soldier or...
Oh, God, that's actually quite a good question, one I haven't prepared an answer for, so I'm going to have to actually stop and think about it, which may well lead to a lot of cutting umming later. Winter Soldier actually isn't a bad shout in that it's... The Winter Soldier does stick quite closely to the comics in the Bucky elements of the story, although none of the stuff about S.H.I.E.L.D. being evil was in the original Winter Soldier story.
Is that a different one?
Well, I think there have been a few comics about S.H.I.E.L.D. being infiltrated. That's more of a general throwback to the feeling than any specific story, I think. The Winter Soldier elements are actually quite close. Civil War is very much in the spirit of, but then again, as I think I may have said at the time, the original Civil War comic is kind of so I don't really entirely mind them changing that. God, I actually have to almost run through it mentally. Age of Ultron doesn't resemble the comic Age of Ultron at all. The middle chunk of Thor Ragnarok is based quite heavily on a Hulk story called Planet Hulk, with the substantial difference being obviously that in the original comic Thor was not there.
Yeah.
So there's a change. But aside from that, weirdly, it's an impressively faithful adaptation of Planet Hulk.
What about some non-Marvel stuff?
The X-Men films are all shit. I mean, bad adaptations, I mean shit. The general tone of Logan is based on a comic called Old Man Logan, but the actual content is nothing like it. Again, tonally, a lot of these things are tonal. Like, this season of TV does feel a lot like Born Again, even if they have changed a lot of the plot beats. I assume, in terms of adapting things, did you get who Dex is meant to be from the comics?
Well, for most of the show, I thought he was building up to be more like the Nuke character. I was just waiting for a bit when his psychiatrist or whatever prescribes him the red, white and blue pills. That is the kind of seems to be the feature of the Nuke character. I was kind of waiting for that to suddenly to turn up. But then again, in Jessica Jones, they had bits of people taking red and blue pills to give them powers.
He was definitely Nuke, the guy in Jessica Jones, yeah.
Yeah. What character is Poindexter supposed to be?
He's meant to be Bullseye, I think. In fact, he's definitely meant to be Bullseye, because he's really good at throwing stuff accurately.
That's a character I'm only vaguely aware of. Although they did set up his return in Series 4 or whatever.
Yeah, like I wasn't sure whether you'd seen and remembered sufficiently his appearance in the Ben Affleck film played by Colin Farrell.
Oh, yeah. I've forgotten that.
Yeah, it's that character.
I'd totally forgotten that Colin Farrell was in that film. I remember Michael Clarke Duncan playing the Kingpin, and I remember Jessica Biel possibly as Elektra.
Jennifer Garner.
And obviously Ben Affleck. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
The reason partly I was curious if you remembered it, but partly I wanted to mention there's a bit at the end where they zoom into Poindexter's eye and show a white target in it, which is...
Yeah.
Oh, such bullshit. I mean, that is the sort of adaptation stuff that actually slightly annoys me. It's a bit sort of, who is this for?
Yeah, I didn't get that.
It's for me, clearly, a nerd. But I'm just a bit sort of, I got that he was Bullseye. It's blatantly obvious to anyone with a working knowledge of the comics that he's Bullseye, because he's really good at throwing stuff incredibly accurately. He's a killer assassin guy, and there's a bit in the flashbacks where he's wearing a baseball cap with the Bullseye target symbol on it when he's a kid. You know, anyone who knows he's Bullseye has got that he's Bullseye, and anyone who didn't know who Bullseye is just going to go, why has he got a target in his eye?
Yeah,
what?
That was my reaction.
Exactly, it's shit. The difference between doing sort of that feeling I mentioned earlier, oh, they did the thing, and the story is still good, and people who don't know the comics are still enjoying it, and me going, oh, they did the thing, and they massively basically interrupted the story and threw in a really weird, unnatural moment just to do the thing, just to wank me off and confuse people. Okay.
Yeah, I think as we discussed before, that is called like fan wanking, which is just pointlessly shoehorning stuff in so the fans go, oh, it's the thing, to the point where it kind of really gets in the way of any kind of story, and it's just totally confusing to anyone who isn't a long-running fan.
Yes, knowing the source comic enables you to, spot the fan wanking, and depending on the sort of fan you are, either go, yes, I like it, or, oh god, why?
Yeah.
But anyway, Dex is meant to be Bullseye, even though Bullseye is not in Born Again, but he is also a classic Daredevil villain, and as we said during the review, the series probably did need something else, or some other newness, to bulk it out beyond just Daredevil and Kingpin circling each other, and, I was up for seeing them do their version of Bullseye to fill out that space.
Yeah.
Also, there's a classic moment where, in the comics, spoilers from a comic that came out in the year 1999-2000, where Bullseye has a confrontation with Daredevil in a church and ends up throwing Daredevil's club through Karen Page and killing her.
They didn't do that.
They didn't, but obviously the moments in the church in the Karen flashback episode where he very nearly does that, having obviously been looking a lot like Bullseye, I think was obviously meant to evoke that quite heavily for the fans. And I think that can work quite well as a sort of meta-narrative, You, as a regular viewer, presumably just thought, oh, Karen's in danger, because she obviously is. Whereas I, as a nerd, am able to sit there going, oh, this is actually a lot like the bit where Karen actually dies. Will Karen actually die? And, even though there's a part of me that feels cheapened by buying into that, I do like the subtlety of gently using that to build some tension without stomping on the viewing experience for people like yourself who don't know that moment. I thought that was quite nicely handled.
Yeah, that is a way in which knowing the source comic changes your viewing experience, which is that there's a whole another level in which it's functioning on. You're like, oh, they do that scene, or are they going to do that scene? Are they going to kill Karen Page? That was sort of the episode after they filled in her backstory, and as you said, that's a good opportunity to kill off a character just when you finally found out who they really are. So I guess there's that element, okay, so it's gone down like this in the past, all this in the source adaptation, so I'm waiting for that to happen, and then they can do it or not do it, whereas I'm just enjoying it on a straightforward level of the plot that's been set up by this adaptation. I'm not bringing any kind of, is that what you call metatextual analysis?
I guess it's a metatextual moment, or sort of thinking about other texts whilst watching a text.
Yeah, the same story in different media or contexts, and then you're trying to think about their interaction and overlapping, which sounds like quite an academic way of phrasing it, but it's basically boils down to, oh, I see how this went down in a comic that I read. Is it going to go down the same way? That's created a bigger sense of dramatic tension, or a sort of at least a different sense of dramatic tension.
Yeah, also, an actual named character did die in that scene, even if it wasn't Karen Page, so it didn't feel entirely cheap either.
Yeah.
Which was, again, I thought that was quite an intelligent use of balancing the source and the comics and the adaptation of it all. I quite liked that bit, even though it wasn't from Born Again, which is, again, echoing the fact that this isn't an adaptation of Born Again, it's just a series that heavily evokes it in a few places.
They are very much picking and choosing the bits they want to use. Like I say, they need to use bits of Bullseye comics to work with bits of Born Again.
Yeah, in order to get the emotion of having Bullseye in there. Obviously, Bullseye is not in Born Again at all, so they need to pull from other areas.
I mean, there seems to be two ways, I think, of looking at this, which is the way when you know the source material and you're looking at a new adaptation. One is the metatextual way, which is trying to think, like, how did this go down differently in the past? How did this happen in different ways? That's only one way of looking at it. And then, as we discussed, the other is kind of to have this sense of, like, every adaptation is entirely separate, and I'm not going to think about how they overlap and always think of everything as, like, a separate story. One which I do this for, and I think quite a lot of people have said for, is The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which has been adapted over and over into, first radio, then TV, then books, then a film. Well, then lots of different books as well. Probably other forms as well. It wouldn't surprise me there was a comic out there.
Yeah, and there's books written by people other than Douglas Adams.
Yeah. One thing, as it says, speaking to various Hitchhiker's Guide fans, is you have to be very much like, they're all different. Like, if you're waiting for that bit from the radio show to crop up in the book or to crop up in, like, say, the Martin Freeman film adaptation, it won't necessarily happen. Each one has to kind of work in the medium it's in, and each one is very much like a different story. So if they pull things together in a certain way, then that's just the way it works for that story. Like, if the character's a certain way in a different one, there's just a sense that you'll go mad trying to reconcile the various different versions of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. So it's better just to view them all as, like, separate and existing in their own self-contained universe.
Yeah, I mean, dragging it back to comics, there's no way I can, let myself get too precious about these adaptations, because ultimately the comics are still there, even if for a lot of people this is going to be the final form of it. I mean, something like Hitchhiker's Guide. I mean, Hitchhiker's Guide is a weird one, if only because I think there seems to be some variance between people over whether the definitive version is the radio show or the books. I think it's generally the radio show or the books, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, the TV one I also think sticks quite closely to the radio show, other than it kind of keeps it more, because it was made in, like, the 70s or 80s, so it's got it's got a limited budget to do some of the more outlandish stuff from the radio show, which works because you can just say, oh my god, on the radio, it's a giant spaceship. But yeah, I think for the Hitchhiker's Guide, it also depends on what you encounter first. I mean, the books are written to be very much like novels and structured like novels, whereas the radio show is very episodic, and in fact even the episodes are divided into very short comedic bits.
Yeah, I think I always like the radio show a bit more.
Yeah, I love that radio show. It blew my tiny mind when my dad gave me it on audio cassette back when I must have been about 12. It was like one of the funniest things I'd ever listened to.
Yeah, I think what annoys me with adaptations, it's less that they've changed things. As I say, very few comic adaptations are faithful, and yet I'm still magnanimously able to enjoy them. But it does always mildly annoy me when they take something that used to be good and turn it into shit, even though I know I should just let it go. But yeah, that Hitchhiker's Guide film did on some level fuck me off, even though I know I should have just shrugged it off. Don't get me wrong, it's not a business I'll take to my grave. I just remember watching it and thinking, wow, you've taken a dump on that, haven't you? Yeah,
it certainly didn't live up to the promise.
I mean, I'm just going to forget about it now until I talk about it in my podcast 10-15 years later. That's definitely what I thought at the time. Yeah. But that's a really disappointing failure to reckon with something that was actually good. There's something innately depressing about watching a shit, sluggish reenactment of something that used to have actual soul to it. That's what does occasionally get me down about adaptations. I don't really mind if people shit out shit, he said, again, magnanimously. But every so often someone takes something that was actually good. Like, I would have been, on some level, fundamentally annoyed if this really had just been a completely lifeless, garbage, slow Netflix reenactment of Born Again. Even though they've changed it a bit and there are elements and dynamics of Born Again that were missing, I am happy that I feel like, as you said earlier, they've got the basic themes across, and it seems like the story of, or the sense of Born Again is in there in some way.
Yeah, so it depends on the degree. I guess with all adaptations, yeah, especially an adaptation, something you're close to, it will depend on the quality, seems to be the most important thing, in that adaptations that change the text a lot, if it improves it, or at least makes it work in its current form, are good. It's when they change it for the worse, or at some point miss the point, is when there's an issue.
Well, yeah, but I'd rather have what we've had as Daredevil Season 3 than get an utterly faithful adaptation adaptation of Born Again that is just kind of bleh. I mean, everyone famously points to things like Sin City and the Watchmen movie as things that were clearly trying to be very slavish to the comic, and as a result don't work, or kind of only sort of work.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm happy with that, to be honest. I'd rather have Daredevil Season 3 than the Watchmen movie, I assure you.
Yeah, so that works out well. Another one that divides people, it seems to be this the Keanu Reeves Constantine adaptation, because some people say, well, it's quite a good film, but has absolutely nothing to do with the Constantine comic.
I would go with that. That's the consensus. It's interesting in a way, the way that that's come about. I guess it's quite cheap in a way, because there's literally no reason for that to be called Constantine other than to get the Constantine audience in and to, I guess, cover them for the few elements of Constantine. I'm just changing the pronunciation between sentences now that they have actually used. You know, I guess they had to keep it being called Constantine, lest DC actually sued them over the fact that they did use the lung cancer element. But aside from that, there's not really much Constantine to it.
Yeah.
But yes, it is an enjoyable, stupid, supernatural action film. And to be honest, it's probably better executed than that Constantine TV series from a few years back, which I did kind of enjoy on a very, look, they're doing the thing basis. And I do quite like the guy that plays Constantine, but that was not a great TV show.
Yeah, at least the Keanu Reeves one, they clearly lavished it with money, so it looked impressive.
Yeah, whereas to be honest, the guy who plays Constantine is probably getting better served in his current gig in Legends of Tomorrow, in which he's starring in stories that are completely stupid and nothing like classic Constantine stories, but, you know,
yeah,
it's a lot more watchable. But then again, I mean, maybe there are people who know the Constantine Hellblazer comics really well and therefore just can't enjoy seeing Constantine in these stupid time travel stories dressing in silly costumes because it just makes them want to punch a wall. I think probably has to be a degree of healthy divorcing there, to be honest.
Yeah.
You know, I big myself up as the resident podcast comic expert, but to be honest, unfortunately, Avengers stories aren't really my area, apart from a few really big ones like Winter Soldier and Civil War. I haven't seen most of the stuff they're basing a lot of the Avengers-y stuff on. Like, I haven't read that many Captain America comics, that many Iron Man or Thor comics, or, yeah, even Avengers stuff. So there's probably quite a lot of, wow, they did the thing in the big Marvel Cinematic Universe films that I miss entirely.
Yeah. What about Spider-Man, which you do know well?
I do know Spider-Man well, and I did enjoy the obvious shout-outs that did exist in Spider-Man Homecoming. And to be fair, I mean, a lot of the reasons why, I mean, Amazing Spider-Man was a film that got a bit, and possibly more so in its sequel, but I have not seen the sequel.
Because no one did.
No one seemed to want to. I think it's on Netflix now, but I just can't face it.
Yeah.
It does look like that does basically a pretty close adaptation of the death of Gwen Stacy, but yeah, I mean, you'd think I'd want to see that as a fan. But honestly, in Spider-Man related films, I'd quite like to see, and honestly at this point, rather see Venom than go and watch Amazing Spider-Man 2. Because it sounds like Venom is basically a film that has nothing to do with Venom to an almost Constantinian degree. But some people say it's fun. I've almost reached a point where I slightly regret us not covering it.
Oh, well, maybe one we can come back to in the recommendation section.
Yeah, I do still have a vague plan that I will, but once it dribbles down onto the streaming services, I will get several beers in front of me and watch it, and hopefully it'll be a good time. Okay, that's all we've got time for this fortnight on Moderate Fantasy Violence. Thank you for listening. If you want more from us, you can go to moderatefantasyviolence.com, where, as well as all our other episodes and some essays and stuff, you can find, topically for this episode, a short snippet of audio recorded during our previous recording, in which Alistair found out Luke Cage was cancelled live on air, and we had a short discussion about the general direction of Marvel Netflix stuff. So, yes, a rare bonus excessive fantasy violence clip for the first time in a while. Go onto our website and find that. And then, of course, head over to iTunes and leave us a nice 5-star review.
You can also find us on Twitter, where we're at MFV Podcast, and you can find us on Facebook by searching for Moderate Fantasy Violence. I've been Alistair Ball. You can follow me on Twitter at AlistairJRBall, or find more of my writing at redtrainblog.com.
And I've been Nick Bryan. You can find me on the internet at nickbryan.com, including my new comic, The Little Deaths of Watson Tower, with artist Rosie Alexander, featuring a group of kids finding out about the true nature of death. Not to brag, guys, but our most recent review described it as a joy to read, so, you know, pick it up. And you can also follow me as at NickMB on Twitter. And, yep, that really is all. We will see you in 2 weeks when, not so topically for Halloween, but still, we will be covering The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina. See you then. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Well, yeah, that's the one point,